Doctors and nurses, what was the most "how are you not dead" patient you've dealt with? Doctors and nurses have the most fulfilling jobs of all. They have an honorable responsibility of saving lives. But every now and then, even they become helpless and are unable to save every life. Despite this helplessness of theirs, some patients surprise them and turn out fine. Today, our Redditors share their stories about similar situations they've encountered. We were the closest hospital, so they brought a civilian, a former Air Force medic. His safety gear failed, and this guy fell 128 feet from a communications tower. It had rained the night before, and he fell into a marshy puddle of high grass, flat on his back. Concussion and whiplash. No broken bones, but the bruises that covered his body from head to heel were something to behold. He spent a week in the hospital before he could move comfortably. He did not see that coming. Some people just don't die, right? Like, death is afraid to touch them. I have a friend who literally fell from the top of a hill. It was more than 100 feet. Landed on rocks. At the age of 12 or 13, or probably even younger, and he's still fine today. He used to stammer ever since he started talking, but after the fall, his speech turned out fine. As his parents say, it's because the docs did some surgery near his neck, and it was badly hurt from the fall, and that might have set his speech right. He had hurt his head badly too. Such things would make people usually go brain dead, but nothing as such seen with this guy. Great fellow. He's one lucky guy. We had a guy who'd lovingly crafted his own gladius sword and thrown himself onto it, piercing the sternum and his heart. But he was alive and conscious, and every time his heart beat, the handle of the sword vibrated. Whoa, that's wild! We had a patient come in after mowing the lawn. Patient said that something was kicked up by the lawnmower and hit him in the head. Didn't think much of it. Finished cutting the grass, still had a headache a few hours later, so he came to the ER. We CAT scanned his head, and there is an entire nail embedded into his brain. He had the tiniest abrasion to his forehead and no neurodeficits. He had no idea. Everyone was absolutely dumbfounded. He missed the mark by a nail. Had a patient with an internal temp of 75 Fahrenheit. He was drowsy, but fully alert and oriented. He was found in a river embankment in the middle of the winter, and he had been lying there overnight before he was found by a dog walker. We didn't believe the equipment when it told us 75 degrees, so we repeated the rectal thermometer, then with a different rectal thermometer, and then a rectal probe attached to the bedside and Meditherm system. They were all consistent, and after several hours of heating measures, we got their internal temp up to 90 degrees before they went to the ICU. The second, how the f*** are you not dead, patient, was a person who had a blood sugar of 1800. They weren't in a coma, just a woman who walked in to complain about abdominal pain. The people here appear to be extremely fortunate to be alive right now. Cardiovascular tech here. I was doubling as a special procedures tech in radiology when a healthy young man in his 20s who was visiting a friend collapsed in our CCU. He had lost femoral pulses and was overall suddenly feeling critically ill. We were asked to do an aortic angiogram to define his anatomy, and all arterial access was occluded. We finally got a catheter in his left auxiliary artery and managed to get a picture of his total aortic dissection that began at his aortic valve, spiraled down, and included his right renal and most of his iliac arteries to the femorals. We did what we could to stabilize him and sent him to Houston, where he was grafted and he lived. I saw him maybe 2 years later, and he was back in our shop for a checkup. He was scarred from his neck to his knees. There was a lot of plastic in there. You guessed it. He had unsuspected Marfan syndrome, and it damn near killed him. I never saw anything else close to that much vascular trauma that survived. I wasn't all that aware of Marfan syndrome back then, and now every time I see long, skinny digits, I remember that guy. Anyone would! Case number 2, my best case ever. A young woman in her 30s had a stroke. She clotted off the basilar artery, a big artery in the base of the brain that supplies all the primitive functions, like breathing and awareness. I found her about a day after the event. This, by the book, is a hopeless case. She was literally already dead. But because she was young, they prevailed upon me to do something. I poked a catheter, a long skinny plastic tube, into her groin area, and then snaked it up to the blocked artery in the base of her brain. I infused a clot-busting drug into the artery for about 12 hours, called TPA, and I rechecked, and the clot was gone. She woke up the next day. After a month, she literally walked out of the hospital. She sent me a nice card a month or so later, and it bothered me that her handwriting was better than mine, even after her stroke. But I was pretty happy. You were like an angel to her. Not a provider, but I used to work in the ER. Hard to narrow it down to one, but one morning a guy drove up to the doors, pushed his dead girlfriend out of the passenger door onto the sidewalk, and drove away. Bad heroin that he had given her. 2 hours later, she was awake and whining for that same boyfriend. The nurse angrily explained the situation to her and said, "You were dead because of him," she said. "Meh, ain't my first time. Narcan is something else." The other would have to be the 13-year-old caught in a gang-related shooting. Her entire torso was covered in bullet holes, several in her throat. She was raggedly breathing through several of those holes. A month later, she walked out of the hospital. Those two cases appear to be out of this world. As a lab tech, I had one I dubbed Everything Guy. He was complaining of a sore stomach after coming home from overseas, so he got the usual "what are you doing" questions. He was in West Africa, didn't bother to get any anti-malarials, no vaccines, admitted to eating bushmeat, also said that he thought it was undercooked, drank water from a local source. Turns out this was directly from a river without filtering it. River was apparently badly polluted, hired prostitutes while there, didn't use protection. He basically saw everything you shouldn't do on a holiday and used it as a checklist. Death was terrified of him. I'm not a doctor or a nurse, but the doctor who saw my mom said he had no idea how she was alive. Years ago, my mom was having gastrointestinal problems. She had incessant stomach aches and was bound up with something awful. After 3 days of not being able to poop, she went to the doctor to get checked out. After a thorough examination, the doctor determined that her gallbladder needed to be removed immediately. The next day, after the surgery, my mom comes to and sees the doctor standing over, and he wasn't happy. "Your gallbladder is dead," he said, like dead. In fact, it was completely gangrenous. Had you waited another day to see me, you would have died. Had it ruptured during surgery, you would have died. That was the worst, most stress-inducing surgery I have ever had to perform in my 20-year career. No offense, but I hope to never see you again. And he walked out of the room. We once received a patient that was bitten by a rattlesnake twice. He only managed to get to the emergency ward 3 hours after being bitten. Then, to make things worse, we only managed to get the correct antivenom flown in 1 hour after his arrival. He now works at our hospital as an admin clerk and is healthy as ever. He became immortal as a result of the snake bite. During my EM rotation, Guy had a road accident, flesh wounds as deep as his intestines were out. Around 40% of his face was scraped off, one eye was out of the socket, the right forearm had ripped off muscles, and you could see the bone. Now the miracle is that the bleeding somehow had stopped when I came in. I saw his chest moving and him holding his intestines. I was like, yeah, wow, this guy is alive. We helped him, stitched everything back, the face was reconstructed, and now he is alive and well. He's blessed! Have you ever experienced anything similar in your life? If that's the case, how did you perceive them? Please leave your comments in the section below, and please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.